Hi loves, I'm so happy to be back and talking to you all again. I apologized for the unplanned break I took. It started as a tiny mental health break and then life happened and ended up being much longer than I planned. I apologize for the radio silence and I promise that I'll try to make sure that doesn't happen again. Or at least that I'll give you a warning if it does. I don't want to hold up the case too much, so I'm just going to give a quick warning that this case includes the death of a child, among others. Take care of yourselves and feel free to skip this one if it's too much for you. Barrington, Rhode Island is a small coastal town that lies about 10 miles away from the state capital of Providence. The area used to be inhabited by the Wampanoag, but was colonized with the arrival of the Pilgrims. Finding information about Barrington has been surprisingly difficult. I wanted to give a little local color about the place, but there's not much. There's an organization called the Barrington Farm School that helps people learn how to garden and educates people on the environment and food equity, which seems awesome. Also, Barrington's coat of arms is just a sword on a shield, which is pretty sweet, if oddly monarchistic. But Barrington seems like a quiet place. It's one of the safest places to live in the country, though with the small caveat that I couldn't find statistics from 1991, when the events of this case occurred. Either way, it has that safe suburban getaway feel, the kind of place you migrate to if you can afford it, and you fit the demographics. So, when a woman's dog ran away from her in the woods on November 7th, 1991, her mind probably didn't immediately turn to foul play. Even with local current events being what they were, she probably assumed he'd got wind of a squirrel or rabbit and ran to chase it. When he didn't return at her call, she followed him into the trees. She walked through the brush and debris until she suddenly reached an unnaturally clear area. In the center where her dog was sniffing, she could see shallow depressions, and some light-colored substance was strewn across the ground. Being a gardener, the woman recognized the substance as lime and called the police. This unfortunate dog owner had found the bodies the entire town of Barrington was searching for. Ernest and Alice Brendel had moved to Barrington for the safety of their young daughter, Emily. They left New York City sometime after 1983 and probably well before 1991, but no one gave a specific date. New York crime at that time was well above the national average and spiked every year, till it hit a peak in 1990. So they chose to use their resources and find a less dangerous place to live. Emily was born later in her parents' lives than most. Math has told me that Ernest was probably 44 when he had her, and his wife 38. Which doesn't seem that old to me. My parents had me around the same age, but it might have also been a factor in their protectiveness of Emily. According to everyone who knew them, the Brendels were good people, home buddies who preferred to stay in. Ernest, 52 in 1991, had a law practice that specialized in copyright law, and Alice, 46, worked as a librarian at Brown University. Little Emily was well liked by her friends and teachers both at school and at the YMCA, where she had after-school activities. Despite their friendships in town, no one had a chance to realize the Brendels were missing before the search for their bodies began. And the search wasn't triggered by finding a crime scene, or even getting a tip. No, it's far more absurd than that. Christopher Hightower needed an alibi. While most murderers would do their best to put as much distance between themselves and their crimes as possible, Hightower had a better idea. An idea that would not only blame someone else, but would net him a tidy profit. He arrived at a house on a quiet suburban street in Guilford, Connecticut, and rang the doorbell. This was where he met the first roadblock of his master plan. Christine S. opened the door to a strange man who said he had information about her brother Ernest. But she wasn't having any of that. She was in the middle of a dinner with friends, and he'd have to come back later if he wanted to talk to her. As a side note, I'm using an initial for Christine and her husband's last name, because in the documentary for this case, Christine only went by her first name, leading me to believe she doesn't want people to know her full name. I want to respect her privacy as much as possible. Sorry for this interruption, and back to the case. A frustrated Hightower retreated and returned later, as instructed. This time he got the chance to tell his completely believable story to Christine and her husband. Hightower told them how the Brendels owed the Mafia money, and they'd been kidnapped because of their debt. The Mafia had put a ransom on the family, and instead of calling Christine or literally any other family member, they'd told Christopher Hightower that he needed to pay $300,000 to have them returned. Asking some random person to pay a ransom is frickin' weird. But wait, there's more. Hightower claimed that he had most of the money, but he just couldn't cover all of it. It was too much. He needed their help to pay the last $75,000, or the Brendels would be doomed. Okay, I'm paraphrasing, but it is ridiculous. He must have seen in Christine's eyes that she didn't believe him. Honestly, the moment he said Mafia, I would have kicked him out the door, so she showed admirable restraint to listen to that whole bullshit story. But Hightower had a trump card. He led the couple out to the car he had driven to their home, a car they could easily recognize. It was Alice's Toyota. I'm not sure what kind of car this was, like a sedan or a hatchback. But either way, he opened the back or the trunk and revealed a blood-soaked interior. He claimed that when the Mafia had taken Ernest, they had broken his jaw and he bled all over the car. Now, I don't have to be a doctor to find all sorts of holes in that story. But Christine's husband, Alex, was a doctor and trained pharmacologist, and he immediately knew something was up. There was too much blood there to be from a broken jaw, and possibly enough blood to indicate someone had died. Christine was smart enough that she wasn't going to pay Christopher Hightower's bogus ransom. She told him that she didn't have $75,000 just lying around the house, which, legit, and she couldn't help him. Thwarted, Hightower warned her against calling the police. The Mafia was tapping her phone, and they'd kill her brother and his family if she did. I like to imagine she nodded at him placatingly till he drove away, and then rolled her eyes. What I do know is that she and Alex went straight to a neighbor's house and called the FBI. I should probably interrupt our regularly scheduled timeline to let you know a little bit more about Christopher Hightower. Christopher Jameer Hightower was born on August 20th, 1949, to a loving family. He was the eldest of 5 children, but he was the favorite among them. If you're looking for a big source of trauma, a reason for what he did, there isn't much. He was told by his parents one day that his dad wasn't his biological father. His reaction to this was extreme. He hated his dad after this day. After joining the Navy out of high school, Hightower never had contact with his father again. But I have a hard time connecting this incident with his actions as an adult. After he left the Navy, Hightower decided to go to the University of Rhode Island to study zoology. He also got married in 1972 to a woman who I don't have a name or any details for. For convenience's sake, we'll call her Jane. Things went along fine for a while, until Hightower got restless with zoology and decided that he wanted to go to medical school. This was a problem on a few levels. Hightower was never blessed with academic intelligence. He tried in school, but only ever squeaked by. I want to be very clear. There are many different types of intelligence in the world, and a lack of intelligence isn't a moral failing. Rather, Hightower's failings came from a lack of ethics and morality, and an overabundance of self-worth. But this lack of academic ability led to poor grades on his part, which is not what med schools look for. So he hired someone to falsify his transcripts from failing grades to all A's and B's, so he could get accepted into Wright State University in Ohio. There was also the small matter of paying for this. Med school is expensive, and Hightower and Jane didn't have that kind of money. So he decided to just sell their house. Jane was rightfully unhappy about this, which led to her and Hightower's divorce. In 1982, either just before attending WSU, or when he'd just begun, 33-year-old Christopher Hightower met 21-year-old Susan Slicker, and the two married. Hightower didn't magically become a better student when he tricked his way into med school, and now he was failing his classes. But that was fine. He managed to find a more rewarding way to spend his days at university. He began investing money. Well, when I say investing, I mean scamming, and when I say money, I certainly don't mean his. There are no specifics about what kind of scams Hightower was pulling, so I don't know what his methods were. But I know the result was that he ended up stealing $10,000 of his classmates' money. Shockingly, no charges were filed against him for this. Hightower had come to the end of his time at WSU. There were at least 2 coincidental fires in his home that led to a postponement of an important test in his doctoral. But eventually he had to take it, and he failed. So he and Susan packed up and moved to Barrington. They chose Barrington because Susan's parents lived there. They had an old, enormous house that must have appealed to Hightower's self-importance, because he moved in and didn't leave. There, he and Susan had 2 children, and he became an important figure in the local community, and his church in particular. Hightower started up his own investment firm, and I think we can all see where this is heading. He had no idea how to honestly invest his clients' money. It was all a scam. Unfortunately for him, one of his first clients was Ernest Brendel. Ernest was initially taken in by Hightower's big talk, and he invested with him. Hell, he even loaned him the money he needed to buy computers for his office. The 2 families became such good friends that they would go on vacations together, and they were very close. It didn't take long for this to all unravel, though. Ernest was a conscientious man, the kind of man who would naturally keep an eye on his money. Imagine his shock when he checked his investment account and realized his investment was gone. He was infuriated, and he confronted Hightower. Hightower managed to convince him to invest with him again. He had falsified reports from another client to make it seem like that client had earned a lot of money, and showed them to Ernest. Unfortunately, poor Ernest believed him. Whatever went down there, Ernest invested another $15,000 with Hightower. But there was something that Hightower hadn't planned on. Ernest was friends with this other client. I'm not sure how much time passed between the prior incident and this, but he asked to see his friend's returns and saw that they were different from the ones he had been shown. A concerned Ernest again checked his investment account and saw that his $15,000 had turned into around $3,000. Concerned that Hightower wasn't properly equipped to do his job, he reported him to both the National Futures Association and Commodities Futures Trading Commission. Hightower's license to trade was revoked. This caused enormous stress in Hightower's life. His office equipment was repossessed. He couldn't pay his rent, and he began to argue with his wife Susan at home. When Susan told him she wanted a divorce, he told her he'd paid the mafia $5,000 to kill her and another grand to make it look like an accident. What is this man's obsession with the mafia? But as you can expect, Susan didn't care for this threat, and she will remember it. Let's rejoin the timeline. Hightower approached Christine S. and her husband in a dual attempt to fabricate an alibi and make some money, which failed. The couple then called the FBI. The FBI told the local police what they had been told, and the police were dispatched to the Brendel house. The Brendel family home was empty when law enforcement arrived. There were no signs of foul play, no blood, no signs of a struggle. That didn't mean that there was nothing suspicious. In the carriage house that served as the garage, a small round hole had been made in the door. Police had no idea what had made it, but it wasn't there naturally, and one officer told how every phone in the house was missing its cord. The cords weren't pulled nor cut, but entirely gone. The police knew this was a serious situation. Something odd had happened at the Brendel home, and given Christine and Alex S.'s account, it didn't seem like the Brendels were safe. So the department put out a bolo on Christopher Hightower and Alice's Toyota. He was caught almost immediately and arrested. While questioning Hightower, investigators searched the car. The abundance of evidence they found made up for the lack of it at the house. Immediately noticeable was the blood, of course. But there was also a fucking crossbow and bolts just lying in the back seat. Additionally, they found a bag of lime and 3 human teeth. Who just drives around with all the evidence in the car? A stolen car. Not just stolen, but stolen from one of the victims. I second-guessed all of my tweets, but this man had the confidence to drive around in a murder-mobile. The police accepted the fact that the Brendels were likely dead, so they focused their questioning of Hightower on that. They wanted to know where the bodies were. Hightower stuck to his mafia story for the most part, but when a detective mentioned they were searching near his home, he said, "Sarge, you're wasting your time. They're not buried there." Citizens of Barrington were shocked to learn that Christopher Hightower was suspected of the murders of the Brendel family, but it didn't stop the town from turning out in force to search for them. They searched high and low, but didn't find them. Until November 7th, when our unfortunate dog owner chased her recalcitrant dog into a gravesite. But during this time, police had been investigating the crime. They had managed to put together a likely timeline of events to a certain point, with help from a veritable mountain of circumstantial evidence and eyewitnesses. But they were still lacking a motive, at least until they received a letter from the National Futures Association. The letter had been sent on Ernest Brendel's stationery, and it withdrew his complaints against Christopher Hightower. It had Ernest's signature on it, but later this would be determined to be a forgery. Suddenly, the police had a motive, and things started to fall into place. And when the bodies were found and autopsies performed, things got even clearer. The following is a reconstructed series of events. Spoiler alert, but Hightower will never admit to any of these crimes, so we can only piece together what happened using evidence. On September 19th, Hightower drove to Seekonk, Massachusetts, where he purchased a Bear Devastator crossbow and 6 bolts. It might sound like a smart idea to drive out of town to purchase your murder weapon, but Seekonk is only 6 miles away from Barrington, which is exactly what one would expect from Christopher Hightower. It's assumed that Hightower just hung out and watched the Brendel house, waiting for an opportunity to carry out his plans. He got it the next morning when Emily caught the bus to school and Ernest drove Alice to work. He broke into the garage and just waited for Ernest to come back. I'm guessing there was some cover in there he hid behind, because Ernest didn't see him standing there with a crossbow and drive away. He must have sprung up when Ernest was getting out of the car, and that was when he shot the older man at least 3 times with his crossbow. One of these shots was immediately fatal. It severed his spinal cord and went through his heart. But Hightower decided to make sure. He took a crowbar and proceeded to bludgeon Ernest in the head with it. After this brutal murder, Hightower put Ernest into the car and cleaned the crime scene. He used hydrochloric acid to clean up the blood, which must have worked pretty well because the police didn't initially detect anything. The hole in the door of the garage was left by a crossbow bolt, later confirmed by microscopic blood spatter in the area. After the crime scene cleanup, Hightower drove Ernest's body to a remote area of the woods on the edge of town. He buried him there and left. After this initial murder, Hightower returned to the home he shared with Susan, where he cleaned up. But Susan had indeed remembered his threats to her, and he was greeted by a restraining order that ordered him to vacate the premises. Now homeless, Hightower returned to the Brendel house. He knew that there were still loose ends to tie up. His most pressing issue was what to do about Emily. Ernest picked her up every day from her after-school activities, and someone was bound to notice his absence. So Hightower needed to find some way to get to her. He first called the YMCA and asked them to tell Emily to walk home, and they refused, presumably with a, "No, sir, she's 8. His second attempt was to drive there and just pick her up, but that failed too. He wasn't on the list of people that were approved to pick Emily up. I have to say, for the most part, the Y was killing it on their child safety guidelines in 1991. On his third attempt, he called the YMCA again, pretending to be Ernest Brendel. He informed them that he wanted Christopher Hightower to pick Emily up, and that Hightower would be carrying Ernest's driver's license as proof. I'm surprised this worked, but they agreed and he was allowed to pick Emily up. Police would later find a message from Emily on the family's answering machine. She left a message warning her father that Hightower had picked her up from school. She knew something was wrong. When they returned to the Brendel home, Hightower somehow managed to drug Emily with enough Benadryl to knock her out, but not enough to kill her. He then tied her up and left her in the basement. Alice returns on her bus from the Brown Library, and Ernest isn't there to pick her up as he usually is. She walks home instead, and there she is ambushed by Hightower, who overpowered her and tied her up in the basement with her daughter. At some point that evening, Alice made a phone call to a friend, making excuses as to why Ernest couldn't come to an event that evening. While the friend believed that Alice wasn't under duress during this call, we know that Hightower must have had control of her at this time. During September 21st and 22nd, Hightower was seen by many people. People witnessed him answering the door of the Brendel family home. This included a delivery man who was turned away when he tried to deliver a mattress the family had ordered. Subtle, Hightower was not. On the day of the 22nd, it's believed that Hightower forced Alice to forge a letter to the National Futures Association, retracting Ernest's complaints. Investigators think this is the reason Hightower kept Alice alive, so she could forge Ernest's signature. She was strangled shortly afterwards. Okay, let's talk about Emily, and before I do, I want to just give another warning about child death. I can put a timestamp to skip in the YouTube video, but I'm not sure how I would go about doing that on the podcast. Emily's cause of death is something of a mystery. I watched an episode from the true crime series World's Most Evil that claims multiple times that she was buried alive, but it's not that simple. According to an official document, the cause of Emily Brendel's death could not be determined to a reasonable degree of medical certainty. A newspaper article from the Times says that with no signs of trauma either internally or externally, you can eliminate almost everything but asphyxiation. So the answer is really that we're not sure. Saying she was buried alive feels like sensationalism, and I don't want to sensationalize her death. It's bad enough that she was a child who died. What we know is that Hightower took Alice and Emily to the same spot where he'd buried Ernest, and he dug another shallow grave. He placed them in it together, covered them over, and put lime over the entire area to mask the smell of any decomp. And he left. It's not like he tried to hide either. He drove Alice's Toyota all over town until he was arrested, spending the Brendels' money and being witnessed by even more people. From the Friday when he committed the first murder to the Monday when he was arrested, he just tootled around in his stolen car. Hightower genuinely believed that he wasn't going to get caught. Unfortunately for him, the police now had all the evidence they needed to indict him on 11 counts. In addition to the obvious charges of murder, there was also kidnapping, breaking and entering, larceny, forgery, and 3 charges of unlawful burial of a body. The trial was pretty pitiful for Hightower. His defense tried to argue both that the mafia was responsible, but also that Hightower wasn't responsible because he was not sane. You'd think they could just pick one, but no. Meanwhile, the prosecution had some good evidence on their side. I cannot stress enough that he was driving around a car stolen from one of the victims that had blood, teeth, and a murder weapon inside. Then there was that bag of lime found inside the car. You could point out that the graves were covered in lime and make a connection there. But there was more compelling evidence. A piece of a bag of lime had been found in Ernest's grave. And when they compared the piece to the bag in the Toyota, it was a perfect match. There was also the hole in the garage door that perfectly matched one of the crossbow bolts in Hightower's possession. I'm not sure if they were forensically matched, but it's compelling evidence on its own, considering that Ernest Brendel had been murdered by a crossbow. Finally, there were all those witnesses. The prosecution ended up calling over 100 witnesses to the stand. There were all those people who saw him at the Brendels' house, and then there were shopkeepers who brought their receipts. They even had the owner of the hardware store who had sold Hightower that bag of lime. I don't think it was much of a surprise to anyone that the jury found Christopher Hightower guilty on all counts. He was sentenced to 4 life sentences plus 55 years. They're gonna have to find a necromancer if they want him to serve all that. He was also ordered to pay a $30,000 fine for the unlawful burials. Initially, Hightower was sent to a prison in Rhode Island, but he kept being attacked by other inmates. Child killers rarely do well in prison. He was stabbed so badly that they arranged for him to be transferred to Menard Correctional in Illinois. As far as I could find, he's still there to this day. His case isn't very well known. I stumbled across it by accident. I just wanted to tell the story because it made me a little sad to think of the Brendels moving to what they considered a safe place for their daughter, and then becoming the victim of such a pointless crime. Because it was pointless, wasn't it? Christopher Hightower had 0 chance of getting away with it, and he didn't even try very hard. He was just a selfish man who wanted things easy and was willing to kill to get it. That's the end of this case. As always, thank you so much for sticking around to listen to or watch my videos. I'm planning on releasing a little mini episode to update my Lost Girls of Tucson episode. Maribel Gonzalez's trial just ended, and I'm waiting for some details to make themselves known that I may not have heard before. I also have 2 Canadian cases in the works. One is another potential mini episode, but the other is the unsolved disappearance of Amber Tuckero. As always, if you want to support me, press those shiny like and follow buttons. If you want to be an absolute superstar and help monetarily, head to my Patreon at patreon.com/amemoryofmalice or my Ko-fi at kofi.com/amemoryofmalice. Big news is that I now have a $1 tier on the Patreon just for bloopers and outtakes. Stay safe and stay hydrated.